Welcome back to Decouple. Today I'm joined by a very special guest, Minister Todd Smith from the Government of Ontario. Minister Smith, thank you for taking the time to come on the podcast.
Chris, great to see you, and glad to finally make this happen on the podcast.
Absolutely. When I was in Dubai, there was this net zero nuclear summit we were both attending, and I saw the young William Shackle, this 16-year-old force of nature nuclear advocate out of Australia, interviewing in the corner of the media room, and I got a little jealous. I thought, oh my God, he got to you first. But all respect to that young man. He's a hardworking fella.
Yeah, doing great work, carrying the message down in Australia. Of course, they don't have any nuclear on their grid down there, but who knows? If he keeps doing the work he's doing, they may be adding some nuclear to the Australian grid in the near future.
I wouldn't be surprised. So listen, I've got lots I've been dying to talk to you about. Ontario is becoming a place of absolute international interest, and this audience has a very international audience. I think it's probably fair to say you're the minister in this government with the most air miles. As I said, I saw you in Dubai. I know that you've been flying frequently to Eastern Europe, out in Alberta recently. Why is Ontario suddenly on the map like this? And why is our Minister of Energy making such tracks around the world?
Yeah, I think maybe the only member of cabinet who has more air miles is Vic Fedeli, our economic development minister. He's been traveling around too, trying to locate all these EV and EV battery platforms and other new investments into our province. And he's been very successful in doing that. But I think it's really important for Ontario to tell its story about not just the current story and the current climate that we're in, but also the history of nuclear in Ontario and how important a role it's played in helping us do what so many other jurisdictions around the world are wanting to do. And that's two things. One is have energy autonomy and energy security. And then the other piece is cleaning up the air in their jurisdictions. So we were able to close down our last coal plant in 2014, 2015 period. And really, the only reason we were able to do that was because we continued to have a robust supply of nuclear power, and we had made the decision to continue to add to that. And I think it's a great story to tell around the world. We have a 50-year history of providing safe, reliable, affordable, clean nuclear electricity in our jurisdiction, and we should never be ashamed of that. We're a tier 1 nuclear nation. And because of the strong history that we've had, we've been able to embark on this next generation of new nuclear technology, the small modular reactor, which really isn't all that new, but it is a new way of providing electricity onto the grid. And Ontario's in the pole position. We have the first SMR to go on the grid planned for 2028-29 right here in Ontario.
Absolutely. And I mean, we've got this red hot supply chain from the refurbs and this project management skills, which are actually delivering projects ahead of schedule, even with the COVID pandemic, which I think is pretty extraordinary. I hear about a lot of people that are coming to visit, the Australians, the Eastern Europeans. Tell me a little bit more about your interactions with them. What are they saying? Why are they so interested? And why is Ontario so pivotal when it comes to some of the challenges that they're facing?
Yeah, you know what? I mean, I had no idea when I took on this role as Ontario's energy minister that I was going to be leading delegations of folks from around the world on tours at the Darlington nuclear site, or even doing the traveling that I've been doing and sharing the nuclear story around the world. But things really changed in Europe a couple of years ago, right around this time, actually, when Russia invaded Ukraine. There were fears, and I had talked to folks from different jurisdictions, mostly in Eastern Europe, prior to that, about energy security and energy autonomy and how important that was to not be as reliant on Russian natural gas, let's say, as maybe they were, or certainly in Poland, which has a lot of emissions coming from its coal facilities, about how important it was to eliminate coal in that jurisdiction, but also the energy security piece, very, very important to Poland as well, on the outskirts of Russia, and certainly in the shadow of that Russian aggression in Ukraine. Ironically, getting 20% of their electricity from nuclear plants in Ukraine, in the country of Poland. It's been really interesting for me as an energy minister in a subnational jurisdiction here in a province in Ontario to be hosting these types of delegations, and they've come from really all around the world. We've had different politicians and guests coming from Australia. We've certainly had the folks from Eastern Europe and across Europe coming to visit us, and delegations from the United States coming as well. I think everybody is really interested in the small modular reactor piece. They see it as a way to deploy a really flexible generation asset that's clean and possibly eliminating their need for coal plants. We've had governors from right across the United States in visiting us and talking about what we're doing here. In the Western world, that small modular reactor is going to be the first in the G7 to be deployed. So there's a lot of interest just because we are going to have the first one up and running on grid in the Western world in the G7 in, as I say, late 2028, early 29. So anytime you go first, it gets a lot of attention. And, we're really proud of the team that's working on that project because, quite honestly, it's the same team that has worked on the project management for building the CANDUs 40 and 50 years ago, and then also planning the refurbishments that have been on time or even ahead of schedule and on budget, which is really important for a policymaker. It doesn't matter what part of the world you're in. Those are the kinds of things that get the attention of policymakers when you can say you've got billion-dollar infrastructure projects that are coming in 6 months ahead of schedule and on budget. That's going to get the attention of folks from around the world.
Well, when talking about the frequent flying and the air miles, occasionally I get asked about that as someone who cares about the climate, and I talk about this little offset I have, which has been my contribution to fighting for the refurbishment of Pickering. I think you get to share in some of those carbon offsets now, Minister. The decision has been made to move ahead with the refurbishment of the B-side reactors at Pickering. That was just a couple weeks ago, January 30th. Talk to us a little bit about that decision and how it came about. I mean, 2 years ago, it was still, I think, quite a long shot. What were the facts on the ground that changed here to convince your government to move it this way?
Well, we've known for a while now that we were going to need new generation. We had asked the independent electricity system operator, our system operator in Ontario, to do a study for us a couple of years ago now on decarbonizing our grid. It was the Pathways to Decarbonization report, looking at how we could hit net zero in our electricity grid by 2050. At the same time, since we took government, and that's been almost 6 years now, things have really changed in the province. We're seeing new investments and manufacturing jobs coming back to Ontario, where previously they were leaving for other jurisdictions. And I'm sure over the next little while that we're together here, we'll get a chance to talk about some of the mistakes that were made by the previous Liberal government around the Green Energy Act. But when we started to get those foundations right in the electricity sector, and it is some heavy lifting, unfortunately, that has to be done by taxpayers in the province now instead of electricity customers, the ratepayers in the province. We have been able to see the type of growth that wasn't happening previously. So new electric vehicle mandates at all of our OEMs, our auto plants, transforming and adding electric vehicle platforms. Major investments here. We've got 3 big EV battery plants that are locating in Windsor, in St. Thomas, just outside London, Ontario, and then another one in Eastern Ontario. And just to put the size of those plants into perspective, the one that's being built, the Volkswagen plant in St. Thomas, is 1.6 kilometers long by 1 kilometer wide. So, I mean, it's a massive, massive facility. It's going to be one of the largest buildings in the world when it's up and running in a few years. And it's going to use a lot of electricity. We've seen manufacturing move to electrification. Places like our steel plants in Hamilton and Sault Ste. Marie want to build green steel for the auto sector here in Ontario. And they're switching from coal-fired plants to electric arc furnaces to make their steel, which will be green steel, and massive electricity users. So those 3 battery plants and the 2 steelmaking facilities going to electric arc furnaces, just those 5 projects alone are going to increase our industrial electricity demand by almost 25%. So to answer your question, we need clean generation, and we need a lot more generation. So when we did the analysis on the Pickering refurbishment, we can get 2,000, maybe 2,200 megawatts from an existing energy site, which quite honestly, in spite of its age, is operating more efficiently than it ever has the last couple of years. And it just makes a lot of sense to move forward with that plan, particularly when you look at the alternatives. So we've got a fully functioning energy site there that employs a lot of people, is in a willing host community in Pickering, which is key these days too, because we're not locating plants in communities that aren't willing host communities. And it was great to have the mayor of Pickering, Kevin Ash, and a number of members of council and those who are supportive in the economic development part of the jurisdiction come out as well and throw their support behind it. And then because of all the jobs that are there as well, it just makes sense from a power production, clean energy generator, and really an economic opportunity for the province to refurbish that site.
Well, you got a lot of questions at the announcement about whether this was the wisest choice. Why not pursue lower cost wind and solar? And you did bring up the Green Energy Act, and I'm interested to hear it from you. What your perspectives have been managing this ministry, and in the aftermath of this act, which has engendered some pretty significant costs. It must take some will to decide to spend a lot more money on electricity generation when we're coming out of the hole there in terms of the commitments that have been made so far on the renewable energy contracts.
Yeah, so I mean, the Green Energy Act, which was brought forward by the previous government, that was incentivizing, wind and solar projects across the province with feed-in tariffs, contracts that were way over market price for generating electricity, and also giving those assets that are intermittent sources of electricity generation priority access to the grid, was really causing chaos on our electricity grid because of the intermittency of those generators. So when the Green Energy Act started here in Ontario, and I think those who are from Ontario will remember it very well, because your electricity bills soared by 3 times what they previously were. But for those from outside the area, what it meant was a very unstable, unpredictable electricity grid. And we were dumping power that we didn't need because of the intermittency of the wind and solar that took priority access to the grid. So in this case, we're producing 20 to 25% of our electricity in Ontario from hydroelectric green facilities, run of river and places like Niagara Falls. And then about 55 to 60% of our electricity was coming from our low-cost nuclear fleet. So in the case of hydro, we were getting electricity for about 4 cents a kilowatt hour back in the early days of the Green Energy Act, and we were getting our nuclear for 7 or 8 cents a kilowatt hour. But we were paying 80 cents for solar per kilowatt hour, and 20 to 25% for wind power, which was forcing us to either trade that excess power off at a loss to neighboring jurisdictions, or just simply venting the steam from our nuclear facilities, or letting the water run over Niagara Falls, or whatever turbine it might be, without capturing the electricity. So it created a lot of instability in our province. We've chosen to move the cost of those over market priced contracts to the tax base, no longer on the electricity bill, which has created a little more stability, but it's also created something that the province has to deal with, to the tune of about $6 billion a year in paying for these over market prices on our tax bill in the province. So it was an ideological decision that was not based on sound science or or looking at economic development. And as a matter of fact, it drove. I like to say it drove 300,000 jobs out of our province. Since we've moved it to the tax base, we've now seen almost 800,000 new jobs in our province in the last 5+ years.
I was running some numbers past an economist friend of mine, just trying to get a sense of how much the renewables cost shift is costing Ontarians every year. It's 3.1 billion a year. I understand the province spends 3.3 billion a year on hospitals, 3 billion a year on schools, 3 billion a year on highways. So this is not an insignificant line item in the budget.
No, we're spending a ton on healthcare, but it is a significant hit, certainly. But I think it's the right thing to do because, as a result, we're creating a lot of jobs, which means all of those individuals that are now working today that weren't working 6 years ago are paying income tax and increasing revenues to the province in that way. So it makes sense. We haven't raised a tax, we haven't raised a fee since we formed the government, but revenues to the province have gone up by almost $70 billion since we took government 6 years ago, and it's because of the new investments that we're seeing in the province and the number of people that are working, which then allows you to spend more on healthcare and education and social services and all those other areas that are really important to see investments in.
Right. I mean, that same economist, Edgardo Sepulveda, he wrote an interesting article for TVO. And I think it's reflective of the way in which the political spectrum is just kind of topsy-turvy, and it's hard to sort of make out what's left and what's right. The Green Energy Act, that massive expenditure was a privatization of our electricity system services. And he was noticing that, this conservative government has actually made, absolutely historic investments in publicly owned electricity infrastructure. So that's kind of one thing that's sort of caught my eye, as well as the way that the province is collaborating so well with the liberal government federally. I think that's kind of interesting. This sort of new, more pragmatic politics maybe that we're finding ourselves in.
Yeah, I think we all have to work together. We may be from different political stripes. We're a progressive conservative government in Ontario. The federal government is a liberal government. And while I would say our party has been very supportive of nuclear over the history, really, of the party, or at least as far back as I can remember, that hasn't necessarily been the case with sort of the left-leaning parties in Ontario or in Canada, and that includes our federal government. But I think over the last 2 or 3 years, and it's because of the work done by a lot of different organizations, including yours, Chris, and many others, there's a realization that when you set these net zero targets and climate change targets, that you can't do it with just wind and solar and renewables alone. It's impossible to do that. And if you were to do that, it would come at enormous cost. Nuclear sounds expensive sometimes, but when you compare what it would mean to replace nuclear with wind or solar or battery storage, it's actually far, far more expensive, and it's going to use up a lot more land. And I think the government of Canada, to their credit, and we've got a great relationship with Minister Wilkinson, who's my counterpart at the Ministry of Energy and Natural Resources Canada. We've been able to encourage them to make investments into our nuclear facilities and our nuclear programs in Ontario and right across the country. So they've been very supportive of our small modular reactor project, for instance, that we're rolling out at the Darlington site, with almost $1 billion in support from the Canada Infrastructure Bank. They've recently introduced investment tax credits, to support the refurbishment projects and potentially large nuclear projects that we're building out at Bruce Power. They've included $50 million in their federal budget to beef up the CNSC, our Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission, for the hiring of employees there to ensure that we have a framework for siting SMRs down the road in an expeditious and also a way that the communities can trust when it comes to safety and environmental assessments that need to be done and community consultation. So, the federal government has come around. They've warmed to the idea of nuclear because it's really the only way that they're ever going to hit the targets that they've set when it comes to decarbonizing our grid and our country.
In our organization, we always say the best climate solutions belong in every party. And it is interesting, this kind of potential for a pan-partisan approach to nuclear. You know, parties like the Green Party very concerned about the climate. Party leader Mike Schreiner is saying, we accept that Ontario will continue to source its electricity from power stations like Bruce and Darling for decades to come. And, Pickering's just been added to that. So there is almost some tacit support from the Greens. The Liberal Party, I mean, they life extended Pickering in 2018 for quite a number of years. So, you're continuing that legacy. And the NDP, the traditional party of organized labor, has a sector here which has the highest unionization rate really in the entire country. So are you seeing those kind of opportunities opening up, or how politically is the refurbishment announcement being responded to by your colleagues across the aisle?
It's interesting. I think there's a hesitancy from a couple of the parties to full-throatedly support what we're doing. But I think there is a realization that it is necessary. It'll be interesting to see when the House comes back. I believe we are going to be introducing some legislation, that sort of supports what we're doing on the nuclear side of things. I think most of those building trades and power workers and private sector unions that typically supported the NDP over the last number of years have come to support Premier Ford and our party at election time because of all of the infrastructure projects, because of all of the building and growth that's happening in the province. And that means good paying jobs for those building trades and folks that work in the sector, from boilermakers to electricians to welders, you name it. And certainly power workers are in there as well. So we have been getting a lot of support from those who maybe traditionally voted orange here in Ontario that are now supporting blue, just because of all the work that we're doing and the jobs that we are creating for them. So it's a bit of a challenge. I think the duty of the opposition is to oppose, but when you're doing the right thing, like we are in this sector, it makes it difficult for them to oppose sometimes.
So getting back to the refurbishment of Pickering, I get very excited about it compared to 5 years ago. I mean, it's almost unrecognizable, not just the political landscape, but the popular perceptions of nuclear and the policy that's accompanying that. Um, but when I feel elated, I look at the numbers and I go, we're just treading water here. With the refurbishment of the B side of Pickering, we're losing the A side. So we're losing 1,200 megawatts. We'll make up for that, with the 4 SMRs at Darlington. But then by the mid 2030s, we're just breaking even. And as you mentioned, there's a lot of excitement about industrial growth, population growth, and increasing demand. What are we going to do to meet that? What's next?
What's next? Yeah, obviously the nearly 5 gigawatts at Bruce Power, the Bruce C. The clock is ticking on that now. Expressions of interests have been submitted from different technologies to the folks at Bruce, and they're going through the process of analyzing the technologies and seeing what comes next. The 4 SMRs at Darlington are going to be important. The refurbishment at Pickering and the refurbishments that are ongoing at Bruce and at Darlington are important as well. One of the challenges that I did face when I became the energy minister was we didn't have a lot of energy sites certified and ready to go. So I think it's incumbent on me to make sure that whomever my replacement is down the road isn't left with only the sites that we currently have. So, we need to look at potential new sites, not just for potential large nuclear, but also small modular reactors. This was one of the things that came out of that Pathways to Decarbonization report from the Independent Electricity System Operator, was that we were potentially going to need 18 gigawatts of new nuclear in the province. With the SMRs and the new large build that's going to be coming at Bruce, we probably are somewhere near the 6 gig mark. So we signed that agreement with the World Nuclear Association over at COP28 in Dubai last year as a subnational jurisdiction in Ontario to triple our nuclear output, much the same as Canada has signed on to triple its nuclear output. Keeping in mind, most of that nuclear output is here in this country in Ontario, but we'll be exploring different potential energy sites and potentially new nuclear sites across the province as well. So I have to leave my successor some options when it comes to siting a new nuclear. Not that I plan to leave anytime soon, Doc. I hope I'm here for a while because I'm really enjoying this role. It's really important work for the future success of our province to ensure that we have the electricity that we need and that it's clean, reliable baseload power from nuclear.
I mean, given how important the sites are and sometimes how difficult they are to access, the decision to use only a quarter of the licensed capacity at Darlington seemed interesting. And the Bruce site is amazing. It's got incredible social license. What Bruce Power's done up there in terms of supporting a vibrant local economy has been incredible. But it is far from our load centers. It did seem like the SMR paradigm was quite prominent and came into fruition when we didn't actually forecast a lot of demand growth coming. And now, obviously, large nuclear is back on the agenda for that very reason. It seems like Ontario is doing an enormous service to our allies in Eastern Europe and to our friends out in Western Canada who just need a smaller size reactor given the constraints of their grids. What are your thoughts there in terms of the use of that capacity at Darlington in terms of just trying to squeeze out the most megawatts given the power crunches that we're facing?
Yeah, I don't have any second thoughts about the SMR piece. I think that's going to be a real opportunity for Ontario to be a global leader and Canada to be a global leader in SMR deployment. But at the same time, it's imperative that we do have future sites for potentially large nuclear reactors in our province, and while that's going on, looking for opportunities for SMRs as well. I'm excited about what the SMR means for the folks who work in our supply chain in Ontario, one of the best supply chains in the world. Over 220 businesses, mostly here in Ontario, that are going to be building the components for the SMR that we're building, the GEH technology at Darlington, but also the components that will be required in the refurbishment process at Pickering and other places. It's going to be great news for that. And then, I think the more that we do and the consistent signal that we send to our confidence in our nuclear sector, that's only going to benefit our GDP because it's those companies that are going to continue to scale up to build the components that are necessary. So I think the next important thing is to make sure that we're looking at developing new energy sites to fill the need. You're right. We could have used that site at Darlington for more large scale nuclear. I think this is going to be a gradual growth that occurs in our electricity demand, and that's coming from the electricity system operator. So we do have time, but we got to get moving. We can't delay too much longer in making sure that we're identifying these sites, getting CNSC approval, and therefore it's imperative too. And we're working with the federal government on this, Doc, is making sure that the federal government isn't bringing in a new process that's going to create further delays and burden in getting new sites certified. And I speak of the Impact Assessment Agency. So we've had great conversations with Minister Wilkinson and our federal Minister of the Environment, Stephen Guilbeault, as well, about how imperative it is that these new nuclear projects and potential new nuclear sites not be delayed with an added layer of bureaucracy from the Impact Assessment Agency for new nuclear. We're very fortunate. We have one of the best regulators in the world, if not the best, in the CNSC, who know what they're doing, and they've done a great job over the years at getting these sites certified.
In terms of our nuclear sector as it is, Canada enjoys something very special, I think, in terms of this extreme supply chain localization. We have numbers from the Ontario Chamber of Commerce saying, essentially there's refurbs are accessing a supply chain that's 96% here in province. We get enormous economic benefit from it. It's hard for competing technologies to match that. And I've certainly heard from some labor friends of mine concerns that, Canadians will no longer be, doing the outages and refueling necessarily of the American style technologies that are coming in the SMR market. And that's a real concern for them. Is the government a part of negotiating supply chain localization mandates? How's your government looking at trying to match the incredible degree to which the nuclear sector harvests its own benefits here in Canada with our localized supply chain and services?
Yeah, well, it's OPG, Ontario Power Generation, that's responsible for negotiating these types of local agreements, and I think they've done a good job on SMR and making sure that 80 to 85% of the components for the SMR are going to be built here in our supply chain. I'm hearing anecdotally from companies that are part of the supply chain in Ontario just how they're getting ready to expand for the increased demand that they know is coming. And every time you make a commitment to build not one but build 4 SMRs at Darlington, and then potentially build not one but probably more than that down in the Tennessee Valley Authority jurisdiction in the southern U.S. And then you hear from Saskatchewan, you hear from Alberta, you hear from Poland, you hear from Estonia about all of the plans that they're making to deploy this in their country or their part of the world. It's increasing that confidence for the suppliers to scale up and prepare for this. So I think, it was a good news story, certainly, to move forward on the SMR at Darlington. And at the same time that's happening, I don't think anybody 6 years ago would have anticipated that, we were in the place where we would need large nuclear in Ontario, and maybe talking about the Bruce C plant that is going to be built over the next number of years out at that site, which is already the world's largest operating nuclear facility on Lake Huron. But we're here, and we're going to be moving over the next little while to prepare for the continued growth that we have, and that means that means more orders for the BWXTs of the world that are creating the big components, and many of the others that are part of our nuclear supply chain. So things are really happening. I think when you've got a sector that's got the proven track record that it has over the last number of years, in particular on delivering on time and on budget, it gives us as policymakers a lot of confidence to move forward. And I think it's a great signal to send to the world that Ontario, Canada is a great place to do business with.
It only makes sense, I think, that OPG is starting to look at assisting other provinces. We've heard with potential agreements with New Brunswick. Only having one CANDU reactor there to run, we've got the experience of running 18. Makes sense that we can share expertise. And similarly, these agreements out with Sask Power and with Capital Power in Alberta, it suggests that there's a role now for Ontario Power Generation and Ontario's nuclear sector to be thinking much more federally, if not internationally. With that in mind, are you seeing sort of federal cooperation or federal funding or dollars coming in with that intent, with that recognition that what OPG is doing now goes beyond the sorry, the borders of Ontario?
Yeah. Yes, I think so. Certainly we've seen it with the CIB investments at the SMR site. The ITCs, the investment tax credits, this would be the first time that Crown Corps would be eligible for investment tax credits. So I think that's important, and that comes from the federal government and our lobbying for that. And it's not just OPG that would benefit from that. It would be NB Power in New Brunswick and Sask Power as well as a Crown agency there. Alberta's market is a different one, but Capital Power, no doubt, a private entity that operates in numerous jurisdictions in Alberta is where their home is, but also here in Ontario, and a number of different energy generation facilities would be really welcome to get those ITCs. So. OPG has really taken a leadership role, and I've been pleased to be out there supporting OPG and Laurentis Energy, which is their international arm, in just growing their business and being there to support, particularly our provincial neighbors. Incidentally, Chris, I don't know if you know this, but when I was 11 or 12 years old as a Boy Scout growing up in Moncton, New Brunswick, I went on a field trip to Point Lepreau, which is the CANDU reactor on the Bay of Fundy, and just before it opened. And so, as a 11-year-old boy in New Brunswick, I was in my first nuclear facility. Never in my wildest imaginations, 40 years later, did I anticipate I would be overseeing one of the largest nuclear build-outs in the world here in Ontario at places like Bruce and Darlington and Pickering. But it's funny how life's path leads you in a certain direction. But to answer your question, OPG has really taken on a leadership role, and you saw this as well at places like COP28 and the World Nuclear Expo in Paris back in November. OPG is there, they're present, they're telling their story about how Canada is a tier 1 nuclear operator and someone that can be trusted to help them meet their energy security and energy autonomy and the different needs that they have to assist in building out their facilities like at Cernavodă in Romania, for instance, and the CANDU reactors there. So it's an exciting time for the sector, and OPG's right there in the mix.
I can't help seeing everything through the lens of healthcare. And I do see a lot of similarities between the nuclear industry and the healthcare sector in that it is a profoundly human story. One of, the best of the best, rising to the occasion, getting the education and training they need to do something truly extraordinary in terms of providing a service. I've been really inspired by meeting people within the sector. I was out at Sheridan Park about a month ago, touring some of the CANDU refurb work that's going on there, and I came across a technologist who's working with some co-op students. They were working on this. It's kind of like a sandblaster machine to clean out the steam generators of some of the existing fleet, and just chatting with that guy and saying, "Hey, man, do you like your job?" And this guy just being passionate, like, "I love this work. I get to solve problems all day. I get to travel around the world." And seeing these co-op students, like seeing that the opportunities exist for them there, it's a very exciting time. I was wondering, maybe just in closing, if you had any of these kind of human factors kind of stories that you'd like to share in terms of that again, that personal human touch to the sector.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you've been doing a great job sort of carrying that message with a medical approach to it, or a medical tangent, and just how important nuclear is. Not just in cleaning the air that we breathe, and the number of people that you're not seeing coming into the emergency room dealing with issues around breathing, because we have been able to clean up the air over Toronto and the GTA and Ontario because of the investments that we've made. We talked about the young guy from Australia who's doing that same type of work as well, and doing great work. Miss America, for goodness sakes. We had the opportunity to meet with her. I know you did at the conference in Dubai with COP28. I did in Paris at the World Nuclear Expo. And I mean, when you bring that kind of star power, if you want to call it that, to the voice supporting nuclear, it's really important to help get that message out. But really, to your point about people who are working in the sector, I hear more and more from young people that are working in the sector, and those who are deciding on which path they want to take for their career, who really want to make the biggest impact that they can in fighting climate change and global warming, and making their impact that way, coming to the realization that the best way that they can do that is by working in the nuclear sector as a nuclear engineer or a nuclear operator, or working in the supply chain to build the components that are going to help provide that emissions-free electricity and continue the decarbonization efforts, where we've been very, very successful in Ontario with a grid that's 90% clean most of the time, and continuing to add to the clean generation. There are countries around the world like Poland that's one of the dirtiest countries in the world from carbon output from their coal plants. And there are young people who are realizing that these countries over on the other side of the pond can benefit from them going to school, whether it's in a university and then moving on to a career in the nuclear sector is going to make a big difference to reducing emissions. But I think the great story too, and we talked about it a bit, is just providing those countries an opportunity to sort of manage their own assets when it comes to electricity generation and not have to rely on a country like Russia or countries that aren't our friends and aren't our allies, giving them the security that they're looking for in that country. So nuclear provides all of that. So if there's anybody listening that's considering a career path in nuclear, take it. We're going to need you as countries around the world are looking to triple their output of nuclear power, and Canada is one of them. We're going to need all hands on deck to make this happen. So don't think twice. Get into the nuclear sector, get into the nuclear business, because I think there's a bright future for you there, and it's really going to make a difference.
I almost feel this is kind of like a, we need you moment, because there's so much happening in Ontario. I hear that all the time, that there's the constraints we face, again, are the human ones, almost more than anything else, just in terms of having the available staff to do all these refurbishments, get Pickering done, refurbish Pickering, do the Bruce builds, help out in the Romanians in Chernovada. Are there any, just I guess this is a closing bonus question, are there any efforts being made by the government to attract foreign talent as well to come and work within the sector to make all of these potential projects a reality?
Yeah, absolutely. There's been a lot of investment from a number of different ministries to train local nuclear workers and to train skilled trades workers, whether it's through the Skills Development Fund or just supporting these programs in our universities and colleges and the building trades, but also looking at immigration and how we can attract the brightest minds from around the world to join the brightest minds that we already have here in Ontario, Canada. So it's there's going to be lots of opportunities for people in this sector, and keep in mind, Chris, it's not just the energy assets that we're building out. I mean, my goodness, in Ontario right now, we're building the largest subway system in Toronto in Canada. We're building out highways. We're building out long-term care facilities and hospitals and schools. Even things like Ontario Place are going to require skilled trades workers, and we're building 1.5 million homes to accommodate the people that are moving into our province that we're anticipating to come here over the next little while. So there's a lot of building going on. I think the good thing is that OPG and Bruce do have a good human resources plan to ensure that they have the skilled trades folks and nuclear workers that they need to keep things on track. The contingency plan that they have when it comes to new build and refurbishment is really world class. And I've got to give the leadership at both of those operations, OPG and Bruce, great marks for planning and making sure that they've got a contingency plan that's going to work to keep the projects on time, on budget.
All right. Well, I think that's a great place to leave it, Minister. Thank you for making the time for Decouple, even though we went a little over time. We are still on budget, sir.
Thanks, Doc.